Why was everyone staring at her like she was something broken? Mary's wrists trembled where they rested on the polished oak table, small hands dwarfed by the courtroom's vast silence. She could feel the weight of their eyes, pity from some, quiet glee from others. 11 years old, curls falling in her face and already branded a liar. Her father was dead, her home slipping away like a tide she couldn't fight. And now this. The judge's gavel cracked once. The sound ricocheted through the chamber like a gunshot. "Order," he said, though the room had already gone still. She sat straighter. She had to. Her father had always told her, when the world doubts you, don't flinch. Across the table, the woman in the immaculate suit spoke smoothly, every syllable wrapped in false kindness. In light of Dr. Thorne's tragic passing and the absence of the child's mother, Foulcrest development petitions for emergency custody. "My mother isn't absent," Mary cut in. Her voice was small but clear. The whispers started again, low, slithering things. The judge's gaze swept down over the rim of his glasses, more annoyed than surprised. "Meridian Mary Thorne, you are to wait until spoken to." "She's coming back for me," Mary said, louder now, and something inside her cracked with it. "My mom is Lieutenant Commander Sorrel Thorne. She's a Navy SEAL." For one stunned second, the entire courtroom froze. Then came the laughter. It rippled in uneven waves, rising from the benches like a cruel tide. A female SEAL. The words passed from mouth to mouth like a joke they'd all heard before. Impossible. Poor delusional child. Father fills her head with fairy tale-ese. The judge's lips twitched in a smirk he tried to hide. "Young lady. She calls when she can. She sends letters through secure channels," Mary insisted, leaning forward, desperate to make them see. "My dad kept records. Call the Pentagon if you want. They won't give you details, but they'll confirm she exists." But the suited woman, Octavia Reeves, was already shaking her head. "We've checked. No record of any Sorrel Thorne on active duty. Certainly not as a Navy SEAL, which has never had female operators." Lies. Mary's chest burned with them. She had watched her father's face light up when her mother's voice came crackling through the encrypted line. She had seen the letters, military seals, code markings she didn't understand but trusted like scripture. The old woman beside her, Mrs. Caldwell, placed a hand on her shoulder, a gentle weight. "I've seen the letters too," she said, voice quavering. "I've heard the calls, they were real." Hearsay, the judge dismissed, and irrelevant. Something tightened behind Mary's ribs, the kind of tight that warned tears were coming if she didn't lock them down fast. She wouldn't give them that. "My mother is real," she whispered. The judge leaned back. "Bailiff." A shadow shifted near the door. Mary barely registered his approach until the cold bite of metal closed around her wrists. The room gasped. She stared down, disbelieving, as the handcuffs clicked shut. Her hands looked impossibly small inside them, a child's hands. The whispers changed shape, softer now, horrified, titillated. "Is this really necessary?" someone murmured from the gallery. "Completely lost it," another whispered. Mary's voice was gone, not broken, stolen. The bailiff's hands were massive, his grip firm but not cruel as he guided her toward the side door. The benches parted silently around them. This was how they wanted the story to end. The broken little girl carried off because she dared believe her mother hadn't abandoned her. Her father had warned her about people like this, people who didn't see the world as it was, only as they wanted it to be. Halfway to the door, she saw him. A man in a naval dress uniform had slipped into the back row. His posture was rigid, his eyes sharp and assessing. She didn't know his name, but she recognized the way he watched the room like it was a battlefield. For a second, Mary faltered in her steps. "Keep moving, little miss," the bailiff muttered. And then the doors behind them exploded open. The sound was like a thunderclap. Conversations died instantly. 4 men entered, their dress blues immaculate, their steps so perfectly in sync it felt choreographed. The insignia on their chests gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Their faces were expressionless, like carved stone. And behind them, her, Mary's breath caught. The woman who walked in didn't move like anyone else in the room. She moved like she belonged to another world entirely, one where hesitation meant death. Her uniform was precise to the last detail. A thin scar traced her cheek, stark against skin gone pale from years in sunless places. Her eyes, steel gray, piercing, found Mary instantly. The child inside Mary wanted to run to her. The part that had survived the past 2 weeks stayed, rooted where she stood. "Remove those." Her mother's voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner. A command, not a request. The bailiff froze, glancing at the judge. Before the judge could speak, the man from the back row stepped forward, Commander Winters, the name plate said, and placed a folder on the bench. Lieutenant Commander Sorrel Thorne has been serving in classified operations for the past 3 years, he said. Her communication with her family was limited by necessity. She was extracted from an active mission upon notification of Dr. Elias Thorne's death. The judge's face drained of color. He opened the folder. He saw the seals, the signatures, the security classifications so far above his clearance that they might as well have been from another planet. His lips moved soundlessly. The bailiff fumbled the key and removed the cuffs. The sound of them unlocking echoed like a small gunshot in the still air. And then Sorrel crossed the room in 4 precise steps. She knelt before her daughter. No dramatic embrace, just their foreheads touching, breath mingling, a silent promise. "I told you I would come back," Sorrel whispered. Mary nodded once, and all the walls she had built cracked open. Silent tears spilled down her cheeks. "Dad said I should never doubt it." For an instant, something raw flashed across Sorrel's face, grief, rage, something older than both. Then it was gone, buried under layers of iron discipline. She rose, hand still on Mary's shoulder, and faced the room. "My daughter told you the truth," she said quietly. "You chose not to believe her." No one breathed. Winters spoke to the judge again, voice clipped. "Dr. Thorne's death is under federal investigation. The Falcrest development petition is suspended effective immediately. All custody matters will be handled through secure channels." The words landed like detonations. Octavia Reeves went pale. Judge Blackwell gripped the bench, as if the wood might hold him up. And just like that, it was over. Sorrel turned back to Mary. Her voice softened in a way that seemed to shock even her. "It's time to go home." The seals fell into formation around them, not protective, definitive. As they passed through the courtroom doors, the townspeople who had come to watch Mary's humiliation looked anywhere but at her. Shame had a sound, and it was silence. Outside, the air tasted like salt and cold steel. Government SUVs idled at the curb. Commander Winters opened the rear door, waiting. Sorrel ducked inside with her daughter. As the door closed, the world of Harborview fell away behind them. Inside the vehicle, silence stretched for several miles before Mary finally whispered, "Did Dad die because of your work?" The question was small, too small for what it carried. Sorrel's throat tightened. "I don't know yet," she said, "but we're going to find out." Mary pressed her forehead to the window, watching their home peninsula rise ahead, weathered and defiant against the sea. Her mother sat beside her, perfectly still, like a blade sheathed in flesh. The girl who had been handcuffed for telling the truth leaned closer to the woman they had all called a myth. And for the first time in weeks, Mary allowed herself to believe she might be safe. The peninsula rose like a clenched fist against the gray water, stubborn and windswept, the same way her father had been. Mary pressed her forehead to the SUV's cold glass as their home came into view, its weathered siding standing against the elements, the wide bay windows catching the last streaks of sunlight. It looked the same, but it was not anymore. Her mother hadn't said a word since they left the courthouse. Neither had the seals in the convoy ahead and behind them, silent shadows on the road. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the ocean breathing against the shore. Mary turned her head slightly, studying the woman beside her. The uniform was gone now, replaced by something simpler, though it changed nothing. Sorrel sat upright even here, hands still, eyes moving constantly. The sharp planes of her face were unreadable, but the set of her jaw, that was familiar. Elias had worn the same look when he was carrying a weight he wouldn't share. Mary shifted in her seat. "You're different." Sorrel's gaze stayed on the road ahead. "So are you." It wasn't comfort, it wasn't meant to be. The convoy rolled to a slow stop before the house. Commander Winters came to Sorrel's window, leaning down just enough for his voice to carry. "The perimeter's secure. No signs of forced entry, but forensics marked some disturbances near the dock. We left it untouched until you arrived." Sorrel nodded, understood. The SUV door opened, and the sea air swept in, salt, damp pine, and something faintly metallic Mary couldn't place. She hesitated a moment before climbing out, her sneakers crunching on the gravel drive. The house loomed in front of her, familiar and strange at the same time, like a photograph she half remembered. She had lived here her whole life. Now it felt like someone else's home. Sorrel stood beside her, eyes scanning everything. The driveway, the windows, the distant tree line. It was how she looked at foreign streets on the rare postcards she sent, like territory to be mapped, measured, secured. "Stay close," Sorrel murmured and started forward. Mary followed her up the steps. The front door creaked as Sorrel pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, dust motes swirling in the angled light. Everything was exactly as they had left it, and wrong in ways Mary couldn't name. Sorrel paused in the entryway. Her eyes flicked to the slight scuff marks on the hardwood near the bookshelf, the crooked angle of a framed photo, the faint indentation of boots in the carpet by the study. "They were here," she said softly. Mary hugged her arms around herself. "They said they were from the insurance company. They asked about Dad's work." Sorrel turned to her, sharp. "What did you tell them?" "What Dad told me to say, that he studied kelp forests and water quality." Mary hesitated, then added, "I didn't show them his office." For just a moment, Sorrel's face softened, something like pride passing through her features. "You did exactly right." They moved through the house together, Sorrel gliding like a shadow, Mary trailing close behind. Every creak of the floor made Mary flinch. Every silence pressed heavy on her chest. At the end of the hallway, the study door stood closed. Mary hesitated. "I haven't been in here since the day they found him." Sorrel's hand hovered over the doorknob. Her voice, when it came, was almost gentle. "You don't have to come in." Mary straightened. "I do." Sorrel opened the door. The room smelled of paper and salt. The desk was neat, the way Elias had always kept it, but there was a tension in the space, like it was holding its breath. Charts of tidal currents and kelp beds lined the walls. The window overlooked the bay, the water flat and dark beneath a sky just beginning to bruise with evening. Mary's chest ached. Sorrel stepped inside with the measured caution of someone entering hostile ground. She scanned the room, eyes narrowing on details, the slight misalignment of the desk chair, the faint scrape on the floor where the filing cabinet had been shifted. "Someone searched this," she murmured. Mary stayed by the door. "They came the day after she stopped, swallowed. They said it was for insurance, but they took pictures of everything." Sorrel didn't answer. She crossed to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines until they stopped on an old copy of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. She pulled it free, thumbed it open, and smiled without warmth. Inside the hollowed center lay a small encrypted drive. Mary blinked. You knew it would be there. Your father liked irony, Sorrel said. She slid the drive into the computer on the desk. The login screen blinked. She tried their wedding anniversary. Denied. Mary's birthday. Denied. Sorrel's eyes narrowed. She typed coordinates, numbers Mary didn't recognize, and the screen unlocked. Files filled the screen. Months of logs, sonar graphs, environmental samples, timestamps, coded transmissions. What is it? Mary asked. Proof, Sorrel said. Her voice was low. Of what? Sorrel didn't answer, not yet. She scrolled through the data, the pieces assembling themselves in her mind like a puzzle she had already started solving years ago. Unusual vessel signatures, unregistered watercraft, sonar traces that could only belong to submarines. Foreign submarines. Meeting here, in these waters. Mary hovered at her side, reading none of it but seeing everything. The way her mother's face tightened, the way her jaw locked, the way her breath slowed. What killed him, Sorrel murmured, wasn't the ocean. Before Mary could speak, Commander Winters appeared in the doorway. Lieutenant Commander, something you need to see. Sorrel's eyes flicked to her daughter. Stay here, lock the door. Mary wanted to argue, but something in her mother's tone stopped her cold. She nodded. Sorrel followed Winters out into the fading light. The air had shifted, colder, sharper. The bay below the house glimmered steel gray, the water unnervingly still. At the end of the dock, naval forensic technicians crouched over the weathered boards, headlamps casting pale cones of light. Winters spoke low. Blood not much but enough for DNA, and this. He held up a small evidence bag. Inside was a broken watch. Sorrel's breath caught. Elias' watch, the one she had given him before her last deployment. She stared at it, her face unreadable. Only her hands betrayed her, fingers flexing once, then going still again. This wasn't an accident, she said. No, Winters agreed quietly. Sorrel's gaze lifted, sweeping the horizon, and stopped. Far out on the water, just at the edge of visibility, a boat sat motionless. No running lights, no movement. Watching. Her expression hardened. Post additional security, she said. They're still out there, and they know we're on to them. Winters nodded and moved to relay the order. Sorrel stood alone at the edge of the dock, the water whispering below her feet. For a moment, her composure cracked and grief punched through like a wave, sharp, cold, stealing her breath. She closed her eyes, and she could almost feel him here. The quiet laugh, the way he would stand with his hands deep in his jacket pockets, watching the tide. The way he had said, "Come home to us," like it was a promise she had to keep. Then she straightened. The tide would not carry her, she would carry herself. When she returned to the study, Mary was curled in the desk chair, chin on her knees, eyes red but dry. She had locked the door, just like she was told. Sorrel paused in the doorway, something fierce and fragile flickering across her face. You did well, she said softly. Mary lifted her head. Did they kill him? I don't know yet. Mary's jaw tightened, echoing her mother. Then find out. It was not a plea, it was a command. And Sorrel understood exactly who her daughter was going to be. Morning bled slowly into the house, pale light spilling across the worn wood floors. It should have felt like homecoming. It didn't. Sorrel stood in the kitchen, motionless except for the slow rotation of the mug in her hands. She wasn't drinking the coffee, just holding it, absorbing its heat like a tether to something human. Steam curled into the air, vanishing before it touched her face. The house was too quiet. 3 years she'd been gone, living in places without windows, without days or nights, just mission after mission and silence in between. Now, surrounded by familiar walls, her body wouldn't unclench. Every creak of the settling house sounded like an approach. Every gust of wind against the siding made her shoulders stiffen. She hadn't told Mary that, she didn't know how. Footsteps padded softly behind her. "Couldn't sleep?" Sorrel asked without turning. Mary shuffled into the room, wrapped in an oversized hoodie, hair tangled from restless dreams. She opened the refrigerator and stood there a moment as if she'd forgotten what she was looking for. "Too quiet," she murmured. Sorrel nodded once. She knew that feeling intimately. Silence could be louder than explosions when you were waiting for something to go wrong. Mary poured herself orange juice and leaned against the counter, watching her mother over the rim of the glass. Sorrel could feel her gaze, sharp and unblinking, the same way Elias used to watch her after deployments, as if trying to decide if she had returned as the same person who left. "Are we safe here?" Mary asked finally. Sorrel set down her mug. She considered her words carefully. She had never lied to her daughter about danger, but she had always measured truth like ammunition, only what was necessary. "We have security in place," she said, "and I'm here now." It was the closest she could come to a yes. Mary nodded, though her eyes didn't soften. She had lost the luxury of believing words at face value. Sorrel finished her cold coffee in one swallow as Commander Winters stepped into the kitchen, his boots silent on the old floor. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "Perimeter's holding," he reported. "Naval intelligence divers are sweeping the bay near where Elias was found. Admiral Einar's coordinating with federal agencies to dig into Falcrest's finances." "And Judge Blackwell?" Sorrel asked. Her tone was flat, but her eyes were not. "Under investigation. Him and Reeves both. Initial traces show offshore payments to shell companies linked to foreign fronts." Sorrel absorbed that without visible reaction, though something coiled tighter inside her chest. "And the boat that was watching us last night?" "Registered to Police Chief Orion Vane," Winters said. "We've got him under surveillance now." Sorrel's jaw flexed once. Mary's voice cut through the tension, quiet but clear. "After Dad died, men came. They said they were from insurance. They spent hours in his office and in the boathouse. They said they were making an inventory, but—" she hesitated. "They were taking pictures of his research." Winters glanced at Sorrel, eyebrows raised slightly. "Smart kid." "She's a thorn," Sorrel said simply. Then to her daughter, Mary, "I need to see everything your father was working on. Can you show me?" Mary hesitated only a moment before nodding. They crossed the yard in a tight triangle, the autumn wind biting off the water. The boathouse loomed at the edge of the property, weathered planks dark with salt. The padlock on the door was intact, though Sorrel's eyes caught faint scratches on the hasp. Someone had forced it and then carefully resealed it. Mary unlocked the door with a small brass key. The smell hit Sorrel first: salt, oil, faint ozone from long-dormant electronics. The interior was neat but not untouched. Dust patterns betrayed what had been moved. Footprints lingered on the planked floor like ghosts. Mary walked ahead, weaving through water, testing rigs, sample containers, neatly labeled equipment. Dad spent most evenings out here. He said it was for tide studies, but sometimes he'd come back at night different. Sorrel followed silently, her eyes cataloging everything: tool benches, camera mounts, recording instruments camouflaged as scientific gear. Mary stopped at a locked cabinet in the corner. "He said I wasn't allowed in here unless he was with me, but he showed me where he kept the spare key, for emergencies." She reached behind a framed nautical map and retrieved a small key, fitting it into the lock. The cabinet door opened with a soft metallic click. Inside lay notebooks, external drives, waterproof cases, and equipment that didn't belong in any civilian research station. Sorrel stepped closer, her breath slowing. Hydrophone arrays, miniature sonar modules, radiation sampling kits. Elias had built an intelligence station out of scrap and ingenuity. "He told me he was tracking pollution," Mary said quietly. Winters carefully lifted a notebook, flipping through pages of Elias' precise handwriting, his brow furrowed. These aren't pollution markers. These are acoustic signatures. Submarines. Russian Bory class, if I'm reading this right. He was tracking foreign subs in U.S. waters. Sorrel said nothing, just kept scanning, piecing it all together. In the corner of the cabinet, she found a waterproof camera. She powered it on. Images filled the small screen, grainy night shots, distant lights on black water, a small boat meeting what appeared to be a surfaced submarine. The final photo timestamp was 2 days before Elias died. "He got proof," she murmured. Her voice barely existed. Winters met her eyes. "We need to get this to the Admiral immediately." A radio crackled from Winters' shoulder. One of the outer perimeter guards. "Lieutenant Commander, be advised, local vehicle approaching, Harborview PD plates." Winters touched his earpiece. "Hold position, do not engage." Sorrel closed the camera and handed it to him along with the notebooks and drives. "Get these to the Admiral." He nodded. "And you?" "I'll deal with Vane." She left the boathouse before either of them could argue, her boots crunching over gravel. The wind off the bay cut sharp lines across her face. She reached the property edge just as the patrol SUV rolled to a stop. Chief Orion Vane climbed out, his badge catching the gray light. He was broad and weathered in his 50s, with eyes that had seen too much and chosen to look away anyway. He paused when he saw her waiting, arms folded, stance steady as a drawn bow. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne," he said, recovering his voice quickly. "I heard you were back. Quite the scene at the courthouse." "Chief Vane," Sorrel acknowledged. "You were watching my house last night." It wasn't a question. Vane didn't bother denying it. "Professional curiosity. When the Navy shows up in force in my town, I take notice." "Is that why you were photographing my dock at 2 a.m.? His smile faltered. "Look," he said, trying for casual. "I don't know what's going on here, but I'm just doing my job." "What job is that exactly?" Sorrel's tone stayed mild, but her eyes did not. "Because surveillance of a military family without a warrant isn't standard police procedure." Vane's gaze flicked past her to the SEALs stationed at intervals along the property line. Their presence made his mouth tighten. "Judge Blackwell asked me to keep an eye on things," he said. "After your husband's accident, said there were concerns about valuable research materials." "Did Elias speak to you before he died?" Vane hesitated. His eyes darted once toward the bay, then back. 2 days before, came to the station asking about boats in the bay, unmarked, no running lights, and about Falcrest suddenly trying to buy up coastal properties. "And what did you tell him?" Vane's jaw worked. "I told him to let it go." Sorrel's voice went quiet, cold, "And now he's dead." Vane flinched just barely. "I didn't think it would go that far. Thought they just wanted the land." "Who is they?" "I don't know names," he said quickly. "Just that Falcrest takes orders from somewhere else, somewhere with enough pull to make problems disappear." His voice dropped. "Your husband wasn't the first to notice strange activity in the bay, but he was the first to document it." Sorrel studied him for a long, silent moment, measuring the truth. Finally, she stepped closer, close enough that he had to tilt his chin up to meet her eyes. "If you want to start making this right, cooperate fully with the federal investigation that's about to bury this town. Otherwise—" She let the pause hang sharp in the air. "Obstruction of justice will be the least of your problems." Vane swallowed, the movement visible in his thick neck. Then he nodded once and stepped back. Sorrel didn't watch him leave. She was already walking back toward the house, her expression unreadable, her hands steady only because she had trained them to be. Inside, Mary was waiting in the doorway, eyes wide. "Was he lying?" she asked. "Not enough," Sorrel said. And she kept walking, the smell of salt and old wood closing around her again like the ghosts of everything she had lost. The conference room had no windows. It smelled of cold steel, burnt coffee, and the faint antiseptic tang of places where secrets lived. Sorrel sat perfectly still at the end of the long table, her hands clasped loosely, her expression unreadable. A pane of reinforced glass separated the room from a corridor guarded by two armed sailors who stared straight ahead like statues. The air hummed with the quiet, constant buzz of classified ventilation systems, the kind that had to hum or the silence became unbearable. Judge Adakis Blackwell sat opposite her, looking nothing like the man who had smirked from the bench. He seemed shrunken. His once slicked hair was disordered, his posture collapsed inward as though the weight of his own name was crushing him now. Beside him, Octavia Reeves sat rigid, her tailored suit flawless but useless armor. Her knuckles were white where they gripped a folder of documents she could no longer control. They weren't running this room. They weren't even its guests. They were prisoners of their own choices. Admiral Einar stood at the head of the table, silver hair pulled back in a severe knot, her presence radiating the kind of authority that didn't shout because it didn't need to. She was flanked by two officials from the Justice Department and a pair of naval intelligence directors, their badges glinting under the cold light. The evidence recovered from Dr. Elias Thorne's research station, the Admiral began, her voice measured, confirms what naval intelligence suspected. Foreign operatives have been conducting intelligence transfers in waters adjacent to one of our most sensitive submarine bases. Her eyes swept over Blackwell and Reeves. And you, knowingly or not, facilitated those operations. Reeves flinched as though struck. We didn't know, she said, the words tumbling fast. Falcrest hired us to secure the property rights. We were told it was a development opportunity. That's all. One of the justice officials flipped a page in a thick dossier. You received payments from offshore accounts linked to known foreign intelligence fronts. Those payments began shortly after Dr. Thorne increased his monitoring activities. Blackwell's lips moved. We thought it was about the land, he said, voice almost childlike. The peninsula been coveted by developers for years. And that justified attempting to strip a child from her surviving parent. Admiral Einar's tone stayed even, which made it cut deeper. Blackwell blinked, his mouth opened and closed, no words came. Handcuffing an 11-year-old girl for telling the truth about her mother. The Admiral's gaze sharpened, blade-like. Explain that. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick and unrelenting. Reeves shifted slightly, as if trying to remember how her spine worked. We were concerned for her mental state. Her claim sounded delusional. You believed what was convenient, Einar said. She closed the file in front of her with a soft click that sounded louder than a gunshot in the still room. This tribunal will continue its investigation into Falcrest's activities. You are both to remain available for questioning. If either of you attempt to leave the jurisdiction, federal custody will follow. Reeves looked as though she might protest. One glance from Einar froze her words in her throat. Then the Admiral turned her head slightly, eyes meeting Sorrel for the first time. You're dismissed, Lieutenant Commander. Sorrel rose smoothly, her chair legs whispering against the polished floor. She didn't glance back at them as she left. They were not part of her war anymore. They were aftermath. The corridor outside was cold and bright. Winters was waiting, his posture loose but his eyes alert. How bad was it? He asked as they walked. They'll fold, Sorrel said simply. Winters nodded. He didn't ask if she cared. He knew she didn't. By the time they returned to the peninsula, night had settled in. The house felt different now, not safer but steadier, like it knew she had chosen it again. Mary was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, a photo album spread open in front of her. The soft lamplight carved out hollows under her eyes. She looked up when Sorrel entered, her expression guarded until she saw her mother's face, and then something inside her unknotted just slightly. Find anything? She asked. More questions, Sorrel said. She dropped her bag by the door and crouched beside her daughter. The photographs scattered across the rug were a map of the years she had missed. Birthdays, school plays, sunlight tangled in Mary's curls, Elias' hand always somewhere just out of frame, holding, steadying, anchoring. Mary tapped one photo gently with her fingertip. Elias stood behind her mid-laugh, her face tilted up toward him, eyes shining. He kept taking pictures of everything, said he wanted you to see what you missed. Sorrel's breath caught quietly. She hadn't cried, not at the funeral report, not at the blood on the dock, not even at the sight of her daughter in handcuffs. But this, Elias' quiet defiance, capturing moments for her as if love could hold time still, this cut deeper than any battlefield loss ever had. Her hands trembled once before she stilled them. "Where did you get these?" "Dad's desk," Mary hesitated. There's something else in there. I didn't open it." "What is it?" "A letter with your name on it." Sorrel froze. Mary rose silently and disappeared down the hallway. When she returned, she held a sealed envelope, the paper yellowed from time, Elias' handwriting steady and unmistakable. Sorrel took it slowly, as though it might detonate. Mary watched her face for a long moment, then whispered, "I'll be upstairs," and left her alone. The house seemed to hold its breath. Sorrel sat on the edge of the couch and slit the envelope with her thumb. "Sorrel," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means my suspicions were justified." Her throat tightened. "I've documented everything on the external drives and notebooks. What started as odd water readings has become something much more dangerous. Foreign submarines are using our bay for intelligence drops. Someone local is helping them. I've collected samples showing radiation traces consistent with nuclear submarines. I've photographed meetings offshore. I've contacted naval intelligence using the protocols you left me before your deployment. If anything happens to me, they will know where to look." The words blurred. She blinked hard. "Tell Mary I'm sorry for the secrets, but not for protecting what matters. You both matter more than anything. She's been so strong while you've been away. She never doubted you would return. That certainty comes from you, Sorrel. You taught her that people who truly love each other always find their way back." She folded the letter carefully, her movements slow and deliberate, like handling an injured bird. For a long time she didn't move at all. The silence roared around her. Then she rose. Mary was in her room, sitting on the bed with her knees hugged to her chest. She looked up as Sorrel entered. Her eyes searched her mother's face, reading what she couldn't ask. "He knew," Sorrel said softly. Mary didn't blink, and he still did it. "Yes," Sorrel sat on the edge of the bed, "because it was right." Mary's voice was small. "Is that why you became a SEAL? Because it's dangerous?" Sorrel considered the question. She had never spoken the answer aloud, not to Elias, not even to herself. "I became a SEAL to protect what matters," she said finally, "just like your father did." Mary's jaw tightened, mirroring her mother. "Then we have to finish what he started." Sorrel looked at her daughter, at the fierce determination coiled inside that small, tired frame, and saw her own reflection. It terrified her. It filled her with pride so sharp it hurt. She reached out, placed a hand gently against the back of Mary's head, and pressed their foreheads together. "You are not alone," she whispered. Mary nodded once, fiercely, and for the first time since Elias died, she let her mother hold her. Hours later, long after Mary had fallen asleep, Sorrel stood alone at the end of the dock. The water lapped softly at the pilings, black and endless. Far offshore, the faint outline of a naval patrol boat cut across the horizon, silent and steady, a ghost in the dark. Elias had stood here once, watching the same waters. He had seen danger coming and refused to turn away. He had died for it. She would not let that be in vain. Behind her, the house's windows glowed warm against the night, Mary safe within. Sorrel's reflection wavered in the dark water, fractured and whole at once. She touched the folded letter in her pocket. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight she allowed herself one moment, just one, to grieve the man who had been her compass. Then she turned away from the water and walked back inside, closing the door against the cold and the ghosts. The storm came in quiet. Not thunder or lightning, just a sudden heaviness in the air, the kind that made the bay go still and flat like dark glass. The gulls had vanished. Even the trees stood motionless. Sorrel felt it in her bones before she saw it. She stood barefoot at the kitchen counter, hair damp from the shower, scanning Elias' notebook spread across the table. Steam curled from her untouched mug. The house hummed faintly with new equipment, sensors, motion detectors, encrypted radios, all brought in under the guise of protective detail. It felt less like a home now and more like an outpost. Winters sat opposite her, sleeves rolled up, methodically scrolling through data on his tablet. His focus was unbreakable, almost surgical. Sorrel liked that about him. It reminded her of deployment, men who never wasted words, never broke concentration because they understood what a single missed detail could cost. Cross-reference the sonar anomalies with the port entry logs, she murmured without looking up. Already did, Winters replied. 5 vessels entered Harbourview Bay without running lights in the last 6 months. None of them filed approach paperwork. 3 of them match acoustic signatures from Elias logs. Routes straight toward our coastline, all stopped within 500 meters of the peninsula. Sorrel's jaw flexed. They were meeting submarines. Looks that way. She flipped to another page of Elias' handwriting, her eyes tracing the careful strokes. Each line carried his voice, steady, precise, stubborn. He'd logged everything, even fear, though never by name. Instead, unidentified pattern persists, of vessel silhouette inconsistent with local craft, Mary asleep at 22:04, wind rising. The last note on the page made her pause. They are getting closer. I think they know I see them. Her hand tightened slightly on the paper. Winters's voice cut the silence. Falcrest's financials are ugly. Offshore accounts, false shells. One lead points to Aurelian Holdings. That's a known cutout for a foreign intel directorate. Sorrel looked up. Russian. Likely, possibly Chinese. The patterns overlap. And Blackwell. $500,000 in deposits over the past year, routing through 6 countries. He's pretending he didn't know, but Winters shook his head. He knew enough. The house creaked under a gust of wind, sudden and sharp. Sorrel's eyes flicked instinctively toward the window. Beyond the glass, the world was a smear of gray, the bay swollen and restless, clouds pressing low and heavy. Mary padded into the kitchen quietly, hair tousled from sleep. She stopped when she saw the notebook spread across the table. "You're still reading," she said softly. Sorrel nodded. Mary came closer, her eyes drawn to the familiar scrawl of her father's writing. "He used to stay up all night sometimes. I thought it was just because he liked the ocean." "He did," Sorrel said, "but he liked the truth more." Mary's gaze shifted to the tablet in front of Winters. "Are you finding who killed him?" "Trying," Winters said simply. "Can I help?" Sorrel opened her mouth, reflexively to say no, but stopped. Mary's eyes were steady, not eager, just determined. The same look Sorrel had seen in her own reflection the night before a mission. "What do you want to do?" Sorrel asked. "I know this house," Mary said, "and I know Dad's codes. He liked to hide things in weird places. He said secrets should live where love already lives." For a long moment, Sorrel said nothing. Then she pushed back from the table and stood. "Show me." They started in the attic. Dust lay thick across old storage boxes, the air tasting of cedar and salt. Mary moved quickly, pulling aside childhood artwork, camping gear, crates of books, searching with a quiet intensity that seemed too old for her age. Sorrel followed, eyes scanning for disturbance patterns, anything recently moved or placed. Here, Mary said suddenly, kneeling by the sloped wall. She pried up a loose plank. Beneath it lay a small weatherproof container. Sorrel crouched beside her and cracked it open. Inside were data drives and photographs. Grainy night images of boats on dark water. Zoomed close, men offloading sealed cases into smaller craft. One frame showed the sharp prow of a submarine breaking the surface, black against black, like a shadow surfacing from deeper shadow. Winter's voice came through Sorrel's earpiece. "We've got movement on the west perimeter. Vehicle approaching slow." "Copy," she said. "Hold and observe." Mary was watching her face. "Is it them?" "Maybe," Sorrel said. "That's why you're going to stay inside." Mary's mouth opened to argue. Sorrel's eyes stopped her. "Not this part," Sorrel said softly. Mary nodded once, lips pressed tight. Sorrel tucked the drives into her jacket and rose. "Lock the door behind me." The storm had thickened outside, the sky the color of lead. Rain began in fine needles as she crossed the yard, the wind knifing against her skin. The approaching vehicle came into view through the haze, a black sedan, windows tinted, moving at a deliberate crawl down the gravel road toward the property line. Winters ghosted up from the tree line, rain dripping off his jacket. Plates traced to a rental company in Boston, paid in cash. No ID. "Armed?" "Can't tell, but they're trying hard not to look like they belong." The car stopped 20 yards out. The engine idled. No one got out. Sorrel stood motionless at the edge of the drive, arms loose at her sides, every sense reaching forward. The wind tore at her hair. The silence stretched. Then slowly the car reversed, gravel crunching, and disappeared back down the road, vanishing into the fog like a shadow slipping beneath water. Winters exhaled, scouting run. "Testing our response," Sorrel said. Her jaw had tightened like stone. "They'll be back." By dusk the rain had stopped. The world was washed clean, silent and sharp-edged under the fading light. Sorrel spread the newly recovered drives across the table while Winters set up a secure uplink to Naval Command. The house buzzed with encrypted chatter, data flowing up through satellites into the dark machinery of federal intelligence. Somewhere, deep inside the Pentagon, analysts were now staring at Elias' work, seeing what he had seen. Mary lingered in the doorway, watching silently. Her presence felt like a fragile tether holding the room together. She finally stepped forward, voice small. "What if they come here?" "They already have," Sorrel said without looking up. "They just haven't decided if they want to be seen." Mary swallowed. "Will they hurt us?" Sorrel stopped typing. Her eyes lifted, locking on her daughter's. "Not while I'm breathing." Mary stared back, and something settled in her expression, an anchor dropping into deep water. "Then I'm not afraid," she said. Sorrel didn't smile, but something eased just slightly around her eyes. Winters glanced between them, then back to the screen. "Command wants a full briefing at 0500. They're spinning up a counterintelligence task force. You'll be lead liaison if you want it." Sorrel nodded once. Of course she would take it. This wasn't just Elias' fight anymore. It was hers. Outside, the night was closing in, the bay a sheet of black glass again. Somewhere out there, men had killed her husband for what he knew. She was going to find them. And she was going to end it. But as she watched Mary curl up on the couch, surrounded by photographs of the childhood Sorrel had missed, she understood something with sudden, terrifying clarity. Winning might mean staying. Not just surviving the battle, but living afterward. That, she realized, might be the hardest mission of all. The night split open without warning. 1 second silence. The next, motion sensors whispering awake in the dark. Sorrel's eyes snapped open. She was already on her feet before she was fully conscious, moving through the house in absolute silence, bare feet making no sound on the wood floor. The red LEDs from the perimeter monitors blinked steadily, But one window showed something new, a shape at the edge of the property line, just beyond the tree line. Motion, then stillness, watching. The air felt different, dense, the way it did right before detonations. She touched her earpiece. Winters, south perimeter, do you have eyes? A faint hiss of static. Then, affirmative, 2 figures, thermal signature cold, they're good, real good. Sorrel's pulse slowed, not from fear but in preparation, every beat measured. Do not engage until I confirm Mary is secure. She turned silently down the hallway. Mary's door was ajar, moonlight spilling across the floor. Sorrel eased it open farther, careful not to let it creak. Mary was sitting up in bed, wide awake, eyes huge and shining in the dim light. I heard them, she whispered. Sorrel didn't ask how she knew. Mary had grown up with silence sharp enough to cut. Listen to me, Sorrel said, crouching eye level. You're going to the safe room now. Mary's throat bobbed. You'll come back. I always do. Mary slid out of bed and moved without a sound. Sorrel followed, guiding her down the narrow hall to the hidden panel behind the coat closet. It opened on silent hinges to reveal the reinforced steel-lined room within, no bigger than a walk-in pantry, but stocked with comms, water, emergency gear. Sorrel knelt. Her hands framed her daughter's face for one still second. Stay here, no matter what you hear. Do not come out until I open this door myself. Mary nodded. Her small jaw was set like stone. Sorrel closed the door, the locks engaging with a muffled click. Then she turned, the soldier waking fully inside her bones. The house was dark now. She killed the lights with one silent flick of a breaker switch. Darkness fell like a curtain. Her eyes adjusted fast. The world reshaped itself in grayscale, edges, angles, threat vectors. Outside, the wind had stilled entirely. She moved to the utility room, lifted the floor hatch, and retrieved the suppressed pistol locked beneath. Cold metal, perfectly familiar. She checked the magazine by touch, chambered silently, then slipped through the side door into the night. The air smelled of brine and pine, and approaching violence. The trees loomed black against a darker sky. No crickets, no gulls, nothing. The world was holding its breath. Winters materialized out of the shadow at her left, his voice a breath near her ear. Thermals vanished. They're cloaked. We're blind. Not cloaked, Sorrel murmured. Cold-soaked. They've done this before. She crouched, fingertips brushing the damp soil near the tree line. The earth was indented, weight pressed here recently, boots heavier than any local hiker. A broken twig angled unnaturally, its break too clean. Close, very close. A whisper over comms, east sensor down. Then silence. Winters's hand lifted in a flat signal, hold. Sorrel ignored it. She slipped forward, a shadow moving through shadows. No twigs cracked beneath her steps, no breath fogged the air. Her body remembered this dance even after years in places with no names. She caught the faintest flicker of movement near the dock, just a shape, darker than the dark around it, pausing by the water line. Observing, measuring. Confirming targets. A ripple of cold went through her chest. This wasn't intimidation. This was reconnaissance for a kill. She raised 2 fingers. Winters nodded and peeled off silently to flank. Sorrel moved closer, staying downwind, muscles coiled, heart slow. The figure straightened slightly as if sensing her, and in that split second she saw the glint of a weapon. She was already moving when the shot cracked. The bullet tore through the night, splintering a fence post behind her. She dropped flat, rolling into cover, pistol up. Winters' suppressed round answered from the dark, snapping the intruder's shoulder sideways. He staggered, hissed in pain, and dove into the black water before she could close the distance. Ripples faded into silence. Gone. Winters swore softly. Extraction points the bay. They'll have a pickup boat. Not tonight, Sorrel said. She keyed her mic. Activate harbor net. locked down the channel. Farther out in the bay, dark shapes rose from the water, naval patrol craft surfacing like ghosts. Their running lights flared briefly, then vanished, slipping into blackout intercept mode. Winters glanced at her. "You just called in the sharks." Sorrel scanned the water one last time, then turned toward the house. "They came for her, not for evidence, not for me, for her." He didn't argue. The house smelled of adrenaline and old wood when she stepped back inside. She closed the door, locked it, and leaned her forehead against the frame for half a second, just half, the soldier receding enough for the mother to breathe. Then she went to the safe room. The door opened on her face, and Mary launched herself into her arms before she could speak. "I heard the shots," Mary said into her shoulder. "It's over," Sorrel murmured. Mary pulled back enough to look her in the eyes. "Is it?" Sorrel hesitated. And then, because she had promised Elias never to lie to her, she said, "Not yet." Mary's chin lifted, the tears in her eyes not falling. "Then don't stop." Sorrel stared at her daughter, so small and so unyielding, and something inside her cracked. This was the cost no one ever warned you about. Not the danger, not the death. But this, seeing your own strength inside someone who should still be soft, and knowing you forged it by being gone. She brushed her thumb gently along Mary's cheek. "Go back to bed. I'll be here when you wake up." "You promise?" Sorrel swallowed. "Yes." Mary studied her for one long second, then nodded and slipped away down the hall, shoulders squared. Sorrel stood alone in the darkened kitchen. The monitors glowed softly red. Beyond the window, naval patrol vessels carved silent arcs across the black bay. They would come again. Sooner, harder, and with fewer mistakes. And when they did, Sorrel would be waiting. She holstered the pistol, sat at the table amid Elias' scattered notebooks, and let her hands go still. Her pulse slowed, breath leveled. The part of her that once belonged only to war settled like steel back into place. There would be no second attempt on her daughter. There would be no chance for these men to vanish back into their shadows. This fight had come to her door, and now it belonged to her. Dawn came sharp and colorless, a blade of light cutting across the bay. The house still stood, silent against the rising wind, but Sorrel felt the shift. The way soldiers feel an ambush before it begins, not sight or sound, just the subtle tilt of the world when it decides to test you again. She hadn't slept. Instead, she sat at Elias' desk with her back to the window, his notebooks open around her like the rings of a fallen tree. The air was cold enough that her breath fogged as she exhaled. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the screen in front of her while the encrypted transmission finished its crawl through black satellites and into the hidden arteries of naval intelligence. Winters stood nearby, his shirt rumpled, a faint cut on his cheek from last night's fight. He looked like he'd been carved out of the same sleepless stone as she was. His voice was rough from disuse. "Command confirms your assumption," he said. "Falcrest is a shell. Aurelian Holdings owns them. Aurelian's a cutout for the SVR." Sorrel's eyes didn't leave the screen. "Russian." "Yeah, and," he hesitated, "there's a U.S. link. One of their banking routes runs through a private consultancy based in D.C. called Acton Maritime Solutions." "American." Former Navy officers, retired with full honors, his mouth twisted, and selling our secrets to the highest bidder. Sorrel closed Elias' notebook gently, as if laying him down. "They killed him," she said. It wasn't a question. Winters said nothing. He didn't need to. Her voice when it came was flat, precise, like cold metal drawn from a sheath. "Then I want the names." Winters hesitated. "If you push this, they'll bury you with him." "They can try." He watched her for a long moment. "This isn't a mission, Sorrel. This is your life." She turned her eyes on him, and he looked away first. By mid-morning, the house buzzed like a live wire. Naval intel techs threaded fiber lines across the floors. Laptops hummed on every surface. Comm screens pulsed in low blue light. The air smelled of ozone and coffee and the faint sharp tang of printer ink. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a war room wearing a family's skin. Mary stood in the doorway silent, watching everything. She said nothing until Sorrel approached, then her voice came small but steady. "Are they going to come back?" "Yes," Sorrel said. "Will you stop them?" "Yes." Mary looked down. What if stopping them means not coming back? The words hit harder than any ambush round ever had. Sorrel knelt so they were eye level. The chaos of the room went mute behind her. "I will come back," she said, quiet and absolute. "Not as a soldier, as your mother." Mary studied her face as if testing the words for fractures. Then, slowly, she nodded and slipped away, her small shoulders set like armor. Sorrel watched her go, the knife edge of her resolve sharpening with every step her daughter took out of sight. The break came hours later, buried in gigabytes of data Winters almost missed. "Here," he said sharply, pulling her to the screen. "Encrypted ledger entries, coordinates hidden in the timestamps. Look." A map unfolded from the data, red pins scattered across global shipping routes. And one pin, bright and pulsing, just offshore from harbor view. Sorrel's breath left her in a slow, deliberate exhale, a drop point. "Tonight," Winters confirmed, 0300. "Who's meeting them?" "Falcrest's project head," Winters said grimly. "Name's Rourke, former Navy, dishonorably discharged. He's running the operation locally." "Then we end it tonight." Winters' jaw flexed. "Command wants you to wait for authorization." "Authorization got my husband killed." She said it like statting the weather. By nightfall, the peninsula had gone dark. The naval techs had withdrawn per her orders, leaving only silence and shadows. Patrol boats lingered out beyond the bay's mouth, invisible against the black water, engines cold. Even the gulls had gone. Sorrel stood at the end of the dock as the last sliver of sunset bled out, the wind clawing through her hair. In her chest, something old and merciless was stirring awake. Not rage, not grief, something quieter and colder. "Purpose." Behind her, the boathouse door creaked. Winters stepped out, dressed in black, rifle slung low. "You're sure about this?" he said. "No," she replied. "That's how I know it's right." He didn't argue. They moved like ghosts through the trees, boots silent on damp earth. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat, and the thin silver glint of the bay ahead. The drop site was a half-rotted fishing pier miles from the house, a forgotten place locals avoided, perfect for people who wanted to be invisible. Through her scope, Sorrel saw them first, two small boats approaching from opposite ends of the bay, black shapes on black water. A third shape waited on the pier, a tall man in a windbreaker, stance wide, phone glowing in his hand. Rourke. He hadn't aged well. The years had carved bitterness into his face and greed into his spine. She knew men like him, men who had once sworn the same oath she had and then broken it quietly enough to keep their medals. Sorrel's voice was a whisper. "Hold fire, I want them breathing." The boats kissed the pier softly. Figures stepped out, carrying sealed cases. No words, just the swift precision of men who'd done this too often. She rose from the shadows like the tide. Rourke saw her a second too late. "Drop the case," she said, her voice carrying clear across the water. 4 rifles snapped toward her. Winters' shot cracked like a bone. One man dropped screaming, rifle spinning into the dark. Chaos detonated. Sorrel moved low and fast, her pistol a black extension of her arm. Muzzle flash strobed across the pier as she advanced, each step measured, breath even. Rourke ducked behind a piling, fumbling for his weapon, cursing. She was on him before he cleared it from the holster. The impact slammed him into the boards. His pistol skittered into the water. Her knee drove into his sternum as she pressed her own weapon under his jaw. "You killed him," she said. Rourke's eyes bulged. "We warned him to stop." "You killed him." "I didn't," he wheezed, blood on his teeth. "It wasn't me, it was orders, you don't understand." Her finger tightened. It would be so easy, so clean. A single ounce more pressure, and everything she had carried since that phone call would go silent forever. But then, is stopping them worth not coming back? Mary's voice, small and steady, cut through her like a blade. Her hand trembled just once. Then she stepped back. Rourke gasped in air, clutching his ribs, staring at her like he couldn't understand why he was still alive. "You're going to tell them everything," Sorrel said softly. "Every name, every drop, every account." "I can't." "You can." Her voice was almost gentle. "Or you disappear here and no one even asks where you went." Rourke stared at her, chest heaving, and something in him cracked. His head dropped. "Okay." Winters hauled him upright, zip-tied his wrists, shoved him toward the waiting patrol boat now ghosting in from the bay, silent and black. Sorrel stood alone on the ruined pier, the water whispering under the boards. The air smelled of salt and gunpowder and endings. She could have killed him, part of her still wanted to. But Mary was waiting for her. And coming back mattered more than vengeance. The sky was pale with approaching dawn when they returned to the peninsula. The house glowed warm against the gray horizon. Mary stood barefoot on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. She didn't speak when Sorrel walked up the steps, boots still wet from the bay. She just looked at her, the way Elias used to, like checking for missing pieces. "I told you I'd come back," Sorrel said quietly. Mary didn't smile. She just nodded and stepped into her mother's arms, holding on with silent ferocity. And for the first time since the world cracked open, Sorrel let herself close her eyes. The fight wasn't over, but she had chosen how it would end. Not in revenge. In return. The news broke 3 days later. It came not as headlines but as silence, the kind that seeps in when the world realizes it was wrong about everything. The kind that bends people's shoulders as they try to walk through town without looking each other in the eye. Harborview had been built on the illusion that nothing here ever changed. Now it was learning what truth could do to a place that prided itself on comfort. Falcrest Development collapsed first. The name vanished from office doors overnight, signs ripped down, accounts frozen by federal order. Then came the arrests. Rourke and 2 of his contractors flown out under black hoods at dawn, flanked by armed federal escorts. Offshore accounts bled dry into federal coffers. Aurelian Holdings dissolved under international pressure, the name erased from corporate registries like it had never existed. And finally the town's own, the familiar names. Judge Blackwell, Octavia Reeves, Chief Orion Vane, all marched one by one into unmarked government cars in front of the same courthouse where they had once smiled down from their pedestals. No one applauded. Harborview just watched, as if the town itself was trying to decide what it would become without its shadows. Sorrel watched it all from the bluff above the bay, arms folded against the cold. The wind tore at her hair, salt stinging her eyes, but she didn't look away. She made herself see it, the way collapse looked when it wasn't explosions and fire. Quiet, administrative, unceremonious. Winters stood beside her, collar up against the gale. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, "Command satisfied, operations classified, your name won't be attached to any of it." Sorrel's jaw tightened. "Elias will." Winters hesitated. "Some of it, the science parts, the rest stays buried." She didn't answer. He studied her profile, the way her eyes stayed locked on the harbor as if daring it to lie to her again. "You could stay with the task force," he said finally. "Head of counterintel. You've got the clearance, the record." Sorrel turned her face to the wind. It burned her lungs clean. "No," she said. Winters nodded once. He didn't ask why, he already knew. She had spent years running missions into darkness, carving pieces off herself to keep the rest alive. But Mary had only ever asked for one thing: come back. This time she meant to. The Thorn home felt different now. Lighter, not safe, not yet, but possible. Mary sat at the kitchen table surrounded by the remnants of their past. Elias' photo album spread wide, papers and maps and letters piled like drifting snow. She was sketching quietly on scrap paper, pencil moving fast, curls falling into her eyes. The room smelled of cinnamon toast and printer ink. She didn't look up when Sorrel came in, just said, "Did they believe you?" "Yes." "Did they say sorry?" "No." Mary's pencil stopped. "They should." "Maybe," Sorrel said, "but we don't need it." Mary considered that, then nodded. She set down the pencil and pushed a small object across the table, a photograph. Elias stood on the dock, wind in his hair, hands shading his eyes as he looked out to sea. Mary had been 5 when she took it. The focus was bad. His smile was perfect. Sorrel stared at it a long moment, something raw and hollow moving under her ribs. "Do you miss him?" Mary asked softly. "Every second." Mary leaned her chin on her hands. "Me too." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't hurt anymore. The kind that felt like presence, not absence. Finally, Sorrel said, "Do you want to see what he found, what he was protecting?" Mary's eyes flickered. "All of it." "All of it." They walked down to the boathouse at dusk. The air was sharp with approaching frost, the bay a sheet of hammered copper under the setting sun. Naval security boats still patrolled at the edge of sight, but they stayed distant now, like respectful ghosts. Inside the boathouse, the equipment stood neatly restored: sonar rigs, hydrophones, radiation samplers, camera mounts. Elias' notebooks were stacked on a side table, pages carefully preserved. The hum of new servers filled the space, low and steady, a heartbeat returning to the work he had died for. Sorrel knelt by the main console, brought the screen to life, and entered the access code. The bay bloomed onto the display in arcs of color, thermal sweeps, sonar pings, shipping paths weaving like veins. "This," Sorrel said quietly, "is why he stayed." Mary's eyes moved across the glowing data, wide and solemn. "He watched the water," she murmured. "Yes, because he knew if someone didn't, no one would." Mary stood very still. "Is that what you do, watch for danger?" "Yes." "And now?" Sorrel paused. The answer tasted unfamiliar in her mouth. "Now I stay." Mary blinked at her, as if trying to believe it. "I've taken a training position," Sorrel added. "At the base. I'll be home for dinner most nights." Mary's lips parted, surprise flashing and vanishing in the same second. "You're not going back." "Not the way I used to." Mary looked down at the glowing map, then back at her mother. "I'm glad," she said softly. Sorrel's throat tightened. She reached out, laid her hand over her daughter's small one on the edge of the console. "Me too." Weeks passed like tides, quietly, steadily. Harborview mended itself in small, awkward ways. Curt nods from neighbors, hushed apologies wrapped in favors no one mentioned out loud. People left baked goods on their porch and never rang the bell. The courthouse doors stayed closed. Mary returned to school. She walked in taller than she had left, shoulders squared, eyes older. The whispers died fast. No one dared call her a liar now. Sorrel drove her each morning, then returned to the base, slipping into a role that felt like exhaling, training recruits who still believed the world was simple, who hadn't yet learned what it cost to carry a weapon and still keep your soul. In the evenings she came home, always home. She cooked badly, burned rice, forgot the salt. Mary laughed at her, loud and unguarded, and the house began to feel alive again. Grief didn't vanish. It just changed shape, softening its edges, becoming something they carried together instead of something that crushed them alone. Some nights when Mary had gone to bed, Sorrel walked down to the dock and stood at the edge, the water black and endless beneath her feet. She would close her eyes and breathe the salt air, and in that silence she could almost hear Elias' voice, steady, sure, telling her she had finally done what he had hoped she would. Come home to us. She had. Spring came. The Thorn Peninsula bloomed wild and defiant, sea grass bending like green fire in the wind. The boathouse hummed softly, the data streams alive again. Naval Command had quietly designated it an observation station, its work classified but fully sanctioned now. On paper, it belonged to the U.S. government. In reality, it belonged to Elias, to all of them. One evening, Sorrel and Mary sat on the dock as the sun fell behind the water, the horizon painted gold and blood red. Naval patrols moved like distant shadows far out in the bay, silent and watchful. Mary's head rested on her mother's shoulder. Are they still out there? She asked. Yes, Sorrel said. But not here. Mary nodded sleepily. Because of Dad. Because of Dad. They watched the light fade to indigo, then to black. Stars began to pierce through, one by one, scattered like secrets across the sky. Sorrel tilted her head back, breathing deep, the cold air filling every hollow place inside her. You know, she said softly, your father wasn't a hero. Mary frowned. He was. He didn't set out to be. He just saw something wrong and didn't look away. He stayed when it was easier to leave. Mary thought about that for a long moment, then said, like you. Sorrel turned her head, looking at her daughter, at the fierce, quiet light in her eyes, at the soft edges that had survived anyway. No, she said gently, like him. Mary smiled faintly, eyes half closed and nestled closer. The bay lay still beneath them, holding the memory of everything they had lost and everything they had saved. And as the stars gathered over the black water, Sorrel understood what Elias had known all along. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply stays. It simply acts. And it always comes home,